I'm Elliot, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi and welcome. It's March 4th, the evening here in Israel, and we're in the period after and perhaps before phases of ceasefire. What I want to talk about is the issue of the ceasefire, but from the point of view of what we've learned over the past year and change, including during the period of the ceasefire that just ended this past Saturday night. First of all, Hamas, as would be expected, violated the agreement that we came to before it even went into effect. And every step along the way did everything they possibly could to violate the agreement in a way that would not break it apart. In other words, they had an interest in continuing it to its end. I'll come back to why in a moment. So they pushed, they tested, they worked on the possibility, I don't know if the assumption, that Israel would absorb violations as it has over the years in the past. And that included, among other things, not handing over names of those to be released in time, saying at one point that they were not going to release the hostages that were scheduled for the coming week. And of course, finally, the savage switching of bodies of Shiri Bibas, the mother she and her two children were murdered by Hamas shortly after they were taken hostage in 2023, whose bodies were then mutilated to make it seem as if they were killed in an Israeli airstrike, which of course they weren't. But on top of everything else, passing on somebody else's body, we don't know whose, was certainly not one of the hostages, and then being caught at it saying something along the lines of, oops, we made a mistake, here's the real one, as if they didn't know which was which 24 hours early. Of course, on top of that, and once again, not surprising, Hamas proved once again what we already knew, that as a bunch of sadistic savages, they abused, starved, tortured the hostages all along. The starvation, incidentally, not because they didn't have the ability to feed them. As a matter of fact, hostages testified that the Hamas terrorists who were holding them were sitting and eating full meals and feeding them scraps or moldy bread or a bit of pasta, averaging something between 300 and 400 calories a day, which is why they lost tens of kilos each in the course of the year, and who knows what ongoing physical damage, to say nothing of the psychological damage that was done to them, that will need to be dealt with over the years to come. So, in short, once again, not surprising, but what we knew, that is that we're dealing with a bunch of sadistic savages. And of course, to add insult to injury, the ceremonies, quote unquote, of the release of the hostages held in Gaza, parading them around live and dead in front of jeering crowds, in some cases endangering them as the crowds closed in. Here, parenthetically, where are all the innocents of Gaza? We'll leave that as an open question. But the population that came out certainly needed to be held back by Hamas terrorists from harming the hostages as they were about to be released. So what can we expect going forward on this? That phase of the ceasefire uh, ended. There was supposed to be negotiations to a phase B, which never took place, and now we're in something of an interim period. The question is now, what does this mean, and where do we go from here? First, I think we need to clarify that Hamas is holding, by our estimates, somewhere between 20 and 24 live hostages. By testimony of those who've been released, most of them are in very bad physical conditions. Some of them were injured. Others have infections. They're being held in chains. They're held in tunnels, and still, of course, not fed in anything resembling a proper fashion. So a great deal of pressure to get them out, coupled, of course, with Hamas' psychological warfare of releasing videos of hostages, in one case staging the death of a hostage and sending a video of her out. And in this case, she was alive. In other cases, filming hostages and then killing them, but sending out the videos as if they were still alive. Pretty much anything that you could possibly horrifically imagine, Hamas continued to do. But now we're down to the last couple of dozen live hostages, plus another 30 or so bodies. And Hamas knows that they are in a situation of these are their last assets. And I hate to refer to hostages in purely economic terms, but for Hamas in particular, the value of these hostages is much higher than the value of the hostages that they've released up until now. These are their last assets. Their supply is running down. The demand on the Israel side is stable, if not going up, in order to get the last ones out. And therefore, Hamas believes, I think with some justification, that they can demand a higher price for these. And I think Israel's willing to pay that higher price if it's something that's not completely outrageous. But I think we need to consider, and the reports of this in the last couple of days, some Israeli government officials anonymously saying something that I've been saying for months, and that is we should not be surprised if Hamas, at the very, very, very end, refuses to release a number of hostages. I'm not going to guesstimate numbers, a few, uh, keeping in mind that the man behind Hamas in Gaza, Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of the late and unlamented Yahya Sinwar, who was responsible for planning and executing October 7th savagery, his brother, Mohammed, was the negotiator of the Gilad Shalit deal, which, among other things, got his brother out of Israeli prison, but released some 1,000 murderers, terrorists, for one Israeli soldier. So Mohammed Sinwar understands that by holding even a few, 2 or 3 or 4, he can hamstring Israel, or at least so he believes, going into the future. Hamas has had a single demand since the very, very beginning of negotiations, and I'm talking about going back to October, November 2023, and that is an end to the Israeli operation, the military operation in Gaza, precipitated by their murderous attacks of October 7th. In other words, Hamas says, we attacked you, we murdered some 1,200 people, we raped untold numbers, we kidnapped over 250, grabbed a bunch of bodies along the way, murdered some of the hostages as well, but let's just call it quits. We'll give them back to you, most of them anyway, and let's go back to business as usual so we can plan the next one. Of course, Israel has said all along that that's non-negotiable. Israel's not going back to that position, and that leaves us in a position of something of loggerheads. We're in a slightly different place today than we were months ago. First of all, Hamas has been seriously damaged, leaders killed, forces destroyed, although they're rebuilding. They're appointing new leaders. They're recruiting new terrorists, but they're not on the quality of what were taken out in 2023 and 2024. Nonetheless, they've gotten their ranks back up to numbers. We don't have precise numbers, but back up to numbers. And they've moved back into the areas that the IDF has evacuated as a result of this most recent agreement to release hostages. So Hamas is ready for a fight again. I don't see any reason to believe that they're going to do any better this time than they did the last time. But this is a jihadi organization. They're willing to go forward and fight at a lower quality against an IDF that has learned many lessons along the way. In other words, if we are to measure purely on paper, a stronger IDF going against a weaker Hamas. Also importantly, there's been a change in administration. And I'm not going to go into whether this administration is more pro-Israel or less pro-Israel. Its method is different. The Biden administration, from the very, very beginning, tried to limit Israel's operations against Hamas and almost immediately threw in the humanitarian question that you need to take care of the Hamas-led civilian population of Gaza as a prerequisite for going after Hamas militarily. Under those circumstances, huge volumes of humanitarian aid were sent into Gaza, and Israeli operations were hamstrung, particularly going into Rafah, by American limitations and warnings that by going in there it was going to create an even greater disaster and kill more civilians than had been killed in the past. Although even those numbers were greatly inflated. Along with that, the United States withheld arms, munitions, and equipment from Israel, some of them critical, but mostly the statements of withholding, along with the statements of warning and the hints that Israel is violating international law and committing war crimes, as well as statements when Israel would take out terrorist leaders, particularly outside of Gaza, the administration saying, we had nothing to do with it, we weren't involved, and the subtext being, if you're going to strike back, don't strike against us, strike against Israel, were all messages to Hamas and Israel's other enemies that American support for Israel was conditional, at least on the operational level. In other words, on the high political, theoretical level, the United States has Israel's back, and Israel has the right to defend itself, and we're with Israel. But on the operational level, we're not going to send you arms. We're going to pressure you to do things the way we want you to do them, and we're going to make clear that whatever you do, we're not responsible for. We don't want to be tied into it in any way, shape, or form. The current administration is doing none of the above. It demonstrably supported Israel in the recent move to stop the shipment of aid into Gaza. And again, this is a largely symbolic step. Our best estimates are that there are between 4 and 6 months supplies stockpiled in Gaza. So stopping shipment for a week or 2 or 3 is going to have no impact whatsoever. But it's a sign that we're doing it. And more importantly, that it was in coordination with the American administration, meaning that America is going along with what Israel is doing, and that's an important lesson to Hamas. Second, the arms that were withheld by the previous administration have been released. Once again, largely symbolic. Many of these things are not going to arrive in Israel until 2026, 2027. In other words, they have no real impact on the fighting that may or may not go on in the coming months, but a clear message that America is not hamstringing Israel, it's not withholding arms, and it's not threatening to withhold arms as Israel goes up against Hamas. So with all of this, we're now in a period of brinksmanship, and I'm not going to make any predictions. Hamas has dug in and said it will not compromise. Only a total end to the war, total Israeli withdrawal, and essentially leaving Hamas in power in Gaza are the conditions upon which it will negotiate. Unconditional negotiations. In other words, this is what they are standing with and standing on, and Israel will have to compromise, in other words, come to their terms. Israel, of course, saying that's not the case and is not going to happen. And in the middle of it, the United States, through its envoy Witkoff, along with the Egyptians and possibly the Qataris, are trying to split the difference and come to some sort of interim agreement and maybe get half of the living hostages out and reduce the numbers. So we're in, as usual, volatile, dynamic times. Along with all of this, the government today approved, in principle, the call-up potential of 400,000 reservists under emergency regulations. In other words, these are not being called reservists who are being called up, but the law has been passed that will permit their call-up anytime in the immediate future. Once again, another message to Hamas: if you want to go back to the battlefield, we're preparing for it and we're ready for it. And beyond the message, of course, the reality that if necessary, those reservists can be called up. So are we on the verge of another major military operation in Gaza? Perhaps. We'll know better in a week or so. But in the meantime, the two sides are speeding toward each other in a game of chicken, where Hamas holds the hostage card. But if we use the analogy of the game of chicken, they're driving a pickup truck and Israel is driving a semi-trailer. So we'll see who yields. We'll see if a compromise can be reached. But at the moment, the two sides are digging in and facing off at each other. So stay tuned. Next week we'll be perhaps a little bit better informed than we are tonight. In the meantime, stay safe, stay engaged, and good night. Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.